All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for this session of the Simply Test live development stream. I'm doing this it comes out to be like almost every other Sunday, but I'm planning on the first and third Sunday of every month to do some live stream development for Simply Test. Also, as a way to give a bonus to our development sponsors, I'd like to call out right now. I want to say thanks to Tugboat for being our sandbox environment provider. Tugboat is the fastest platform to automate the creation of preview and test environments. I use them for my clients. It is great, especially if you have a large database and you need to create previews off that database. They have a way to create saved previews. So you build off of like a snapshot, which is actually something that Simply Test leverages and is really, really, really awesome. I want to say thanks to Centauro, who is our monthly sponsor, and give recognition to Maloon and Druid for their long-standing support as infrastructure providers of Simply Test. And if you want to become a sponsor, we do have an open collective that you can join in on, and a little highlight to our top financial contributors. And again, that is on Open Collective right here. So if you want to help support development, which these live streams don't count against any budget for there, you can do that to help maintain support, development, management costs. I do want to give a shout out to Florida Drupal Camp, who made a donation based off of their contribution sponsorship tier. So thanks for that. That is a big help. All right, so today's focus is going to be on semantic versioning and core compatibility between project releases. I don't have my local site up right now. I didn't hit Docker start because I was going to wait to do that. But there's an interesting problem that we have. So if you pick password policy, forgot the existing site doesn't let you pick a Drupal core version. So in the Drupal community, we now have modules that have semantic versioning, such as decoupled router. So decoupled router has a 2.0 branch and is using semantic versioning, but it supports Drupal 8 and 9. So we can't just assume somebody with semantic versioning is Drupal 9 only. They might support some versions of Drupal 8. And then we can take a project like Path Auto, who still has we'll call it the legacy versioning, where it has the core prefix of 8.x-1.8. So it's not on semantic versioning yet. It still has the core prefix. Well, just because it says 8.x doesn't mean it doesn't support Drupal 9. So as we can see here, 8.x 1.8 supports Drupal 9 and Drupal 8.8 as a minimum. And then of course we have the easy to determine legacy default of 7.x. If it says 7.x, it's for Drupal 7 only. We're good to go. So we need to have Simply Test understand that if it's in the new version of Simply Test, we let you pick the version of Drupal core. So if you want to test Drupal 8.9 or 9.1 or 9.2 or 7, you can. The problem is that when you pick your project to test, we need to know what Drupal core versions you can use. So we need to know, does 8.x 1.8 of Path Auto support 8.7? No, it doesn't. It supports 8.8, 8.9, 9, whatever. Or you could get a, I don't know what module there could be. I'm sure Linkit is probably one that supports these, but so here we go. Oh, actually, this is a great example. So if you chose the Linkit, we could show all these versions, but if you picked 8.x 4.3, it is not Drupal 9 compatible. So if you pick this version, we should only let you see Drupal 8 versions. So what we're recreating is a little bit of what the update module does and what Composer does for determining what versions are compatible with other versions. Woo! This will be fun. So with some of this, we had discussions with the community, we had community do research, and it turns out you can't use the release API to know what compatibility there is. And when I say release API, I mean using the Drupal.org API to find release nodes. Actually, this is just finding the actual project. But regardless, the project doesn't say the compatibility, nor does the release. It's stored somewhere else. So we go through here a bit. I made a quick fix before that just was like, well, if it's semantic versioning, we'll say it's Drupal 9. But that's obviously not a great fix. So Benji found that we need to use the update status XML, which is documented. And this is what the update module uses. So there's updates.drupal.org release history project. We have current all 5.x, 6.x, 7.x, and 8.x. Actually, I didn't realize there was an all. The current supports Drupal 9 and Drupal 8 in one feed. And then obviously we can pick, 7.x. Simply Test is only going to support Drupal 7, 8, and 9. We don't need to worry about the previous versions. So I'm kind of curious about the all. But that might return 5.x, 8.x, or 7.x, and 6.x. So we need to parse this file. So it contains a top-level project element, which has the title, the type, which for Drupal, there are various extension types. There is core, which is only one core, but there's distribution, a Drupal.org module, which isn't really something that you would install. The main ones are module and theme, and distribution, which is a profile. The API version, this is legacy. So in the research, I don't know if it was specified in here. Benji did link to a few things. So if we went to, let's see if I open this. Oh, it doesn't have like Brave isn't going to theme it. So if we went to the release history for 7.x, we would get this API version. That means that it's for the API version is 7.x, 8.x, 6.x, 5.x, the way we're used to thinking about core compatibility. But if we go to /current, that's when we will see the core compatibility, which I don't see listed. Oh, sorry, because core compatibility is inside the actual release. So there's the top level project and all of its releases, and that will have the core compatibility. And as it's documented, it's in current only. And this parses from the info.yaml file. And it's in releases because this could change over time. Projects didn't have semantic versioning to determine, what branch is in there. So it's not on the project level. So that's what we have going on here. I'm going to close a few of these tabs and we'll dive into the Drupal code. Because right, we have this. Benji even linked to the XML feed is queried in update fetcher. So let's dive into that part. As a preface, I already dove into this. I have a merge request open with code, but I kind of went down the rabbit hole. I'm not too happy with the code that's there, so I'm doing a bit of a refresh. I started working on this before we landed the ability to cache core versions, so it was working alongside of it, and it made for good research and development, but I don't think it's anything usable. So I kind of want to start fresh, and I've actually found out working while doing live streaming helps me write better code and come up with a better solution after all, because it's like rubber ducking, not necessarily talking to you directly, but it does help me rubber duck through some problems. So let's get cranking. I want to leave this tab open and this one. So we're going to look at the update module. So let's get into here. We're going to go to core modules and find update, which fun trick if you use PHP Storm, and VS Code does this as well. So if I start typing update, it automatically searches in the tree. So that way it can just bring you to your files as needed. All right, that was the update manager. So this parses the data, and then there is the fetcher which downloads the data. And this is important. So the fetcher will fetch project data. I'm going to close the project, this tree view. So fetch project data. Let's see where that's called. Shoot, didn't want to do. Let's find where it's called. So find usages from the base method, because the base method is off the interface. So we have update processor. Update processor. Where is this called? So update processor, create fetch task, fetch data. So I believe that this is called as a queue. So let's find the usages of this again. So we just know how all this is working. Refresh update data. All right. And where is this called? Update statuses manually. All right. I'm going down a rabbit hole and I'm going to back up. Either way, just to know how this gets populated. During cron, it finds all the updates. And when it does this, here's why we can't find it, because PHP Storm with the Symfony plugin doesn't resolve. Like if I do a command click on update processor, it finds this class, but it won't. It doesn't know that that method is to that service. So we get create update fetch task inside of get updates available. And all this means is it's getting all the projects in the system, is what it's doing, and finding updates that are available. So we can't use this code directly because Simply Test caches all of the projects on Drupal.org, which means that it would be like an absurd amount. So we need to like pick things and see if we can extract things as needed. So the update fetcher, looks like we could use this possibly. So we could use this to build a fetch URL. Maybe not, because it gets the current key and only append useful information if we have a site key and the project is enabled. So it adds some, so we definitely don't want to use this. So when you see that projects on Drupal.org have a usage, not path auto. So when you go down here and it says that it's being used by 643,000 sites and it's got this fancy graph, it's because when the URL is fetched, the site key is appended to identify that it's, what site it is, the version being used, and other modules that are included with that. So that's how this graph is generated when you have the update module installed. So we will have to build the URL ourselves. What's this get fetch base URL? That's based off the project status URL. All right. So maybe we won't be using this fetcher. We'll be writing our own that will download the file for us. The good news is we do have this URL here. So why don't we start by profiles, simply test, modules. We'll put this in the projects folder. Okay, I do have my new branch set up. So let's create a new file called update fetcher. Actually, real quick, I realized that this needs a rebase off of the latest. So 1 second. So fetch prune origin. Right. So many remotes. I want to make sure. So do a get full. This has it already? Oh, okay, I guess it already does. So get checkout that, get rebase 8.x 4.x, and there we go. There we go. Now we have our core version manager. Something was wrong. All right, so we want to call this release. What's this API called? Release history. You know what? I'm gonna make release. I'm gonna make a new namespace to try to organize things better. You know, like when do you decide to make a namespace? Well, I'm probably gonna have 3 or 4 classes that end up having the name release history fetcher, release history parser, whatever else. So I'm just gonna make a new namespace so that way my class name is shorter. I mean, does it really matter? Maybe not, but it's going to help me organize things a little bit better. Because I am one that when I have a bunch of files next to each other, I start to get like, not overwhelmed, but it's like harder to manage. So we're going to create a new file called, let's call it fetcher. And let's just get it, let's start to just scaffold it out. So we need to have the namespace, which is simply test projects, and we're in release history. So final class fetcher, and we know, so we can at least model it off of the update fetcher. It's just the update fetcher has all the extra stuff in it that we don't want to send to Drupal.org. So fetches release history based off of course update fetcher without the statistics added. And we'll do an @c, and I'm going to copy the reference and paste it. Now the reason why I do that is usually when it might even link to it directly. So okay, so here we go. So I did @c. This is like an annotation for C, and then it allows I'm holding down command right now and allows me to do a command click to the file. I don't know if there, and then when I hover over it, it will show documentation. I'm pretty sure VS Code does the same thing. So this way, when somebody's going through the code, it's like, well, why is this here? Oh, it's based off of this. So let's, instead of adding a dependency to the update module, we'll just copy over this constant. If, you know what, actually, no, I'm gonna take that back, because one thing I would love to do is work on improvements here that helps improve the update module in core. I don't even know if the update module in core has a maintainer right now. If you didn't know this, there is a maintainers.txt in the core file, and it tells you who maintains all of the various subsystems. So database update API is missing one, so is update UI. So I don't know who owns the update module maintainership, actually. And is that what update UI means? Is there. So I guess we'll do our part in improving simply test to improve, because that's just the right thing to do. So let's go here real quick, and I'm going to add update as a dependency. So I'll do dependencies. Technically, we should always namespace dependencies now. So Drupal / just update. For those who don't know, this had to be added for the fact that not all modules add a composer.json. So Drupal.org parses the info.yaml to determine modules. And it's a workaround for the concept where Drupal has subpackages that aren't always installed. Take commerce, for example. Someone might need Drupal commerce and, sorry, let me back up. A payment gateway might have just sorry, would typically just have commerce payment as a dependency. The problem is there isn't a module just called commerce payment. It's a submodule of commerce. So between web form and some various other projects that leverage a lot of submodules, that's where part of this namespacing came to. So that's where here we say Drupal update because it's part of the main core package. So if you're ever curious like why that exists, that is why it exists. So now that we have it as a dependency, oh shoot, I realized the constant is on the class implementation and not the interface. I guess that makes sense, but that means we have to require that class. So const update default URL equals update fetcher. I don't think we need to actually copy that in, but it's used in some other areas, like user interface, I believe has it. Oh, maybe it got cleaned up. But I'll just have it. I'm going to remove that. We'll make sure we actually just call that class. So fetch URL, update settings. We do need a HTTP client. And public function, construct. How do they type in? Did they type in it at client interface? This client equals client. You know what? So I'm doing here. So I'm going to refactor that actually. And I don't know how refactor. I'm going to rename it to be HTTP client to be consistent. So how about what's in here? Just build fetch URL, get base URL. So how about we just they have do request. We can just say public function get project data. And they take an array of project data. We just need the project name. So we'll say string project name and then string, what do they call this? So that's the project. What would we consider that to be called? There are two versions of elements. Return the current and legacy all. I guess we'll say releases. We'll just call it. I want to find a word for that. Channel. We'll call it channel. Like what release channel are we looking at? That works for me. So I'm going to just copy in that in for now. And we'll call this gets project release data. So this is called fetcher, get project data. We're in release history. Sorry, naming things is hard. And I definitely like to make sure things are named properly because once it's committed, it's not the greatest. Feed might work, yeah. But I think like feed, I think is like the full URL where the channel is like the component. When getting to the nitty gritty of all of that. So we're going to have URL equals so we need the update fetcher default URL, which is release history. Actually, maybe I want to how do they build it? they just literally do it that way. So we'll do it that way too. So project, channel. I want to add some validation to this. So if channel is not equal to current, or channel is not equal to 7.x, do throw new invalid argument exception. Only the current and 7.x channel are supported. Channel was provided. All right, so we've got that. Maybe I didn't need to copy this at all because it didn't provide too much. So there's the data. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to throw new. Actually, I don't want to catch the exception here. I want whatever invoking this to catch the exception. So I guess there was no reason to really copy all that. So we can just return this data here. And it's going to return a string. So the next step is let's write a test, because tests are great. But first I want to finish documenting this. The project name, project machine name, and then the release channel, current or 7.x, and then the release history XML as a string. So let's go write the test for this. And since we're not interacting with the database here, we can write a unit test. We don't need to have kernel or anything else. When I mean kernel, I don't mean like Colonel Sanders. I mean kernel as in Kernel, which is a minimally bootstrapped version of Drupal. But here, we don't need a database, so we can use a unit test, which is a lot faster. So we're going to create unit, and we'll call it release history. I also like to have my, when I can, have my test match my regular namespace, so it's a lot easier to, follow along. So we're going to call it fetcher test.php. Just in PHP Storm and VS Code, when you create a new file, if you give the folder directory structure and then the file name, it will automatically create the folders for you. So as you saw, I typed in unit/release history/fetcher test. It created those directories for me. So we're going to namespace it. So all tests namespaces start with Drupal test and then the project name. So it's simply test projects. And then the test suite name. So we got unit and then it's release history. So we have fetcher test extends unit test case. I like to add some of the PHP unit annotations to things. So let's say test fetching release data. So we're going to say covers default class. I've never tried to actually run Drupal and PHP unit with code coverage because I imagine it would just be nuts. But I like to just have this here because it is good for documentation too. So even if you're not using code coverage with PHP unit, it's at least it's good annotation to read. So we are going to test valid release. Public function test valid release channels. We'll test it with string channel, and then bool expected exception, and we will create a subject under test class, which is a new fetcher, and we need to provide a new client, so we'll just do new client. Actually, I want one that doesn't go and talk off to the internet, so we'll do client equals this prophesize. So prophesize creates a mock of a class, which only does things that you tell it can do. So like if we said, so we could say client get argument any will return. So we can do a few things like that. We'll get into more mocking later. But if you are curious about that, let me know, and maybe I could do a live stream just on how to do mocking and tests. I did it a lot in commerce because I never wanted to have to install a bunch of data because it would be slow. And when I mean slow, it's like a few seconds, but a few seconds adds up over time. So now we're going to do, so if expected exception, we want to say this set this expect exception message. I want to copy this. So it may not be entirely necessary, but I am writing tests to verify that there is that validation. And I'm going to use it using a data provider. So we'll say subject under test, get project data. We'll just say token and channel. We'll just say this assert true is true. So that's basically passing it. So if we reach here, it passes. And this test won't run until we give it a data provider. Release channel data. And why did I do it this way when I could have just run a test? Because I would have to write 4 different functions to do this. So this way I can just say yield channel is current false. We'll say 7.x and we'll say 6.x. So now if I go to my function and I type this and I say data provider is release channel data and I click run. Whoop. No, I don't want a breakpoint there. So it'll run that test 3 times based off of this. Test did not perform any assertions. Well then. Oh, no, why? Okay, so this is why it's good to write tests. Because I know exactly what I did wrong. I did or here. So if it's not current or 7.x, this needs to be an and. This is why tests are great. And this is why it's good to always write tests, even for the little things. So if I rerun this, oh boy. You know what? Maybe I will just give it a real, I'm just going to give it a real client because I don't want to have to mock all of that data. That is the one bummer when mocking things, is you have to really go through and add all the methods. So see here, it said double client interface P1 get. It's because this get wasn't found on there because it was a, it's mocking against the interface, and the concrete class is what provides that method. So you know what, we'll just have it fetch the data in the test. It's not great, it's not good, you know, test writing to technically have that going and fetching out to remote data, but it is what it is. So here we had a test failure. That's because I said there should not be an exception. when there should be. So if we change that to true, there we go. Woo! We now have the test passing. We know the validation's there. So we will create, now we're going to get into providing test fixtures, because I do want to have this, I do want to test the data that gets returned. So we're now going to get into some fun territory. So we have a fixtures. Oh, hey, this got left over. Let's just delete that file. So I'm going to create a fixtures directory that has release history and has current and 7.x. So what I'll do is, if we were to test this data, you know, if I went to the release history, what is it? Updates. Let's get the path auto. So if we get path auto 7.x, oh, hey, not the 7.x is formatted. Okay. So if at any time we were to have tests that reached out and fetched this data, if there was a new 7.x release, our test would die. And that means that's why it's not good to be fetching to a remote state. You want your test to be repeatable. You know, obviously if the schema changed, our test wouldn't catch that, but we could write a test that does like a, you know, a check for life. But the main thing is we want a test that we fetch and validate. So what we're going to do is we're going to download these files. I don't want to do an inspect. So let's copy that. And let's open in terminal. So we'll do a wget, and that's not what I should have done. So let's move, we'll move 7.x to path auto.xml, and let's go into current, and we'll change this to be current. And now it's formatted. Okay. So let's do curl path auto.xml. Nope, that's not it. I think it's lowercase l. Or lowercase o, sorry. Okay, so now we have some test fixtures. I'm going to run, so I'm formatting the document, which is Option Command L in the keyboard, but I realize I constantly do, I will use keyboard shortcuts in a live stream, and you have no idea what that does because you can't see my keyboard. So I'm going to do Reformat Code, and that stylizes everything. So it's a little bit easier to read. It technically makes the file size a bit bigger because it has white space, but whatever. So Reformat Code, so it's a bit easier for us to read. So let's get a mocked client together. So down here, I'm going to work on creating a mocked client. So private function get mocked HTTP client. That's going to return. We'll have it actually return the client class, because this has all these methods, because it has a call function. And that's why previously this errored, because there is no call function. So there is no way for the interface to know that there's actually a supported get method. So we'll call it mock equals this. We'll call it client equals this. Prophesize client class. And we'll do return client reveal. So reveal unwraps the mock, so it'll give back the actual instance. This library is really fascinating if you ever do a deep dive through into it. So we're going to replace this new with this get mocked HTTP client. Now, test-driven development, which we're doing, right? I had green test. Let's run it again and see what happens. call to member get body on null. So if we look at our fetcher, get body on null because get did not return a response. So we're going to work on some of that. Let's see. So if we do get client, we're going to say get, and we're going to have a set of known URLs, and it actually matches on that. So you can match different mocked returns based on the arguments provided. So we know that for sakes, we're going to copy this. So we know this is going to be one argument, and we can say will return. And inside will return, you're able to pass a series of arguments, and it returns a promise. So anything that you return will be, you can define what will be returned. Now, the one kicker is that we have to return a response interface. And actually, I believe we have to end up copying that as well, because it matches the arguments verbatim. Right, because get has URI and then options. This line's a bit long. So I want to check one thing real quick. We'll yield. I want to see what methods are to see if we can return like a function. So with arguments, we'll return, we'll yield an array of items, we'll return argument, we'll throw. So in will, if is callable promise, callback promise, if promise is not an instance. So this returns return promise, return values. What I'm thinking is the fact that there's a callback promise, callback if it's not callable, this callback, we're going to try passing a closure. So we'll return static function. And what we'll do is response equals not a static function, because then we can't use this. This prophesize response interface, and we want to get it from the PSR HTTP message library. So I'm fairly certain that is what this will return. Let's see if we can get back to the, yep, so there we go. PSR HTTP message response interface. That is exactly what we're mocking here. So we had an issue where the body was empty and needs to be streamable. So we're going to say response get body will return. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say file get contents from our directory. We want the fixtures, release history. This is for path auto current. So we'll do current and path auto. And then we'll say return response reveal. So let's see if this works. Let's see if we get the first test to be green. We did not. Call the member get function on null. All right, so what we'll do is we're going to just take this out, and instead of trying to be super fancy with it and scope it, we will say we'll return response reveal. Let's play it again and see if that works. Well, what the heck? that's supposed to work. One second. We're going to check something. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to hit debug. And we're going to just check Xdebug real quick. So client, we got the object prophecy. Lazy double. It's not, I don't believe that's where it is. Call center. Unexpected calls. That's where things are called in there. So the double is the prophecy. Nope, that's there. That's the class it's for. Doubler, mirror name, classes. I actually don't know where you can read. Oh, method prophecies. There we go. So method prophecies, get object prophecy, method name is get, return promise, return values is the object. So that should be working. So we're going to step through this part where we actually are going to walk through, or not, because it's a mocked object, so we can't find it. But what we can do is break this up. We can say response equals that, and then data equals string body, and actually just return. No, I want to say data and then return data. We could inline those two, but I want to do some debugging along the way. So I'm going to hit debug once more, and if this doesn't work, I'm going to abandon going down the rabbit hole and use real data. All right. Because otherwise I'm just spending time on, perfection with testing. So response is no. Oh, wait, this project's token. Hey. Well, that right there shows, okay, so here's why it wasn't working. In project, this method, I'm saying token module, but I only defined a mock for the path auto. So I bet if I go here and I type that and I debug it, response, look at, we get the response and we get the data, and there's our XML. Great. Well, it pays to proofread. Double check your stuff all the time. So one thing I want to test is I want to make this back into a, I want to see if I can make this back into a callable function. So that way the responses are scoped to each known request. So I'm going to hit debug again. So response doesn't work. Okay. Man, I really thought there would be a way to, whatever. Not going to go down the rabbit hole. We know this works. So let's refactor this to be called, rename it. Let's say path auto current response. And we're going to copy this again, and we'll rename it 7.x. So one thing I'm going to do, I'm holding down the option key, and that allows you to create multiple cursors. I don't know how you do, I don't know any way else you can do that besides holding down option. So now I basically just copy the entire thing to make a mock for the 7.x, and I'll hit play. Now I'm hoping you caught that there's going to be an error, and there wasn't an error because I downloaded the file. Never mind. So I want to make sure y'all notice this too. So before with the tests, it was taking about 300. Actually, this one took this test data set 0 took 500 milliseconds, and test number 1 took 300. And after making the changes, it's now down to 76 milliseconds, 4 and 6. I know some people might be like, well, that's still fast. Like, it was fast before. But just think, like, if you run tests like 500 milliseconds, well, if you have 2 tests that take that long, that's 1 second. When you have per second billing for your CI test, or the fact that, like, you know, it only takes 60 seconds to make a minute. So if you have a lot of tests, you start eating up time. So having fast tests is important for productivity and also your billing for your CI services. It oftentimes gets overlooked because it's like, what's a second? But seconds add up. That was my philosophy. I used to deliver beer. I don't know if many people knew that, but I'd have to go to the county, which was an hour-long drive. I'd have 20 stops. If I wasted 5 minutes at each stop, either like talking to somebody or whatever, that's an extra 100 minutes. That's an hour and a half wasted on my day, and I was paid salary. So I really believe that those micro time savings have big payoffs in the end. So great, we have these tests green again. We have mocks. I wanted to showcase one cool feature of PHP Storm I just discovered. So when you have a Guzzle client that is running an API request, this API tab shows up. And when I click it, it creates an HTTP request file. So now if I wanted to like test this, if I click run, it's like having many people use Postman or Insomnia as like their HTTP client. A lot of folks don't know it's built into PHP Storm. So not only can you create these files, but if you have PHP code that's calling API services, you can click a button and it creates an HTTP test. So this way, if you want to manipulate things and try things, you can do it without running your code. Like you could alter the URL and say, oh, what about current? So current. Run it again. No release available for path all current. Okay, well, turns out when you have an invalid channel, it doesn't throw a 404. It just says invalid. So that right there might be something we need to test too, is if there's an error returned. Yep, fun fact, I did deliver beer. I did for a year and a half, had my CDL A class. I had fun delivering beer out to Whitewater, Wisconsin. Was like my my Wednesdays, and it would do like 50 or 60 kegs of Keystone Light. One bar alone got 30 of them, and it was just it was insane, but it was fun. Driving a truck and throwing heavy things around is fun, but I prefer coding more because it's better for my back, except for sitting all day. Okay, back on task. Sorry. So we have this going on. We have the fetcher. One thing I want to do ahead of time is I know we're going to need this mocked HTTP client for parsing. Yeah, you think Keystone Light's bad? That's around the same time that 4Loco came out, had the caffeine. And I was putting up, and like, I hated stocking those big cans because you have to do them one by one and put them into a shelf, and it takes a lot of time. I was at the grocery store at the Century that's there, or whatever it is, it's gone now. And like, I stocked 2 cases of it, so 48 cans. I put 48 cans away. And then this kid walks by with a shopping cart, puts his hand in there, and just shoves it all into his cart. I mean, technically it's great for my paycheck, but like I just stocked the shelf, and this kid just walked up like it was just like an average day and just bought he bought 48 cans of 4Loco. I'm like, yeah, it was wild. So I said I'm gonna make a new test space. So I'm gonna call it release history unit test base. Yeah, fill it up again. That's like what half of it would be. I'd put in like 3 pallets of Keystone Light on Tuesday, and I'd go back on Thursday and have to drop off another pallet for the weekend. Sorry, no. It was like 3 pallets on Thursday for the weekend, come back on Tuesday with 2 more, 3 more on Thursday, and rinse, repeat. It was ridiculous. Because it's Wisconsin. So I'm going to create a test space real quick so that way I can have that mocked HTTP client method when we start parsing this data. Because we can parse it inside a unit test as well, because we're not going to be, we want to be able to parse the data without storing it in the database to start. So to get there, we're going to do tests. We're going to simply test projects, unit, and release history. This is an abstract class called release history unit test. Oop, extends. One thing you might notice is I was extremely verbose in the class name here. Even though we have a namespace, this is the one time that I will be redundant with class names in a namespace, because otherwise you'll end up with a bunch of unit test case base classes and it's hard to discern. I don't think, we don't have the token module here, but as you can see here, there's a bunch of kernel test base. This is the one time I like to be a little bit more verbose because it's easier to, see what you have. So I'm going to just copy this into here. Yes, import those for me. As you can see, we don't have that method anymore. If I rename this to release history unit test base and make this a protected method. So real quick, I want to touch on that part. So I had it as a private method, and when I moved it out, you can automatically do that. Hold on. How? Sorry, real quick. I've gotten in the habit of making every class final and methods private because it helps explain your API a bit more. If you're working in code and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I really need this data, but it's private. It's like, well, now you have an architecture decision to make. Instead of just going with the flow and saying like, well, I'm going to use this method because it's public or it's protected, so I'll override this class. It forces you to think a bit more about your decisions. And I picked this up from Gabe, Mateo, and Wim with the JSON API module. To get JSON API into core, they made everything private and final and internal. And made my life a pain as I tried to customize it, but it forced architecture decisions and made the API extremely stable. So you can extract methods in the base classes. Well, one day, Gibran, I want you to show me how to do this. Is it in refactor? Oh, extract method. Why didn't it do anything? Refactor. Selected block should represent a set of statements or expression. What? Really? No. All right, one more try, and then I'm giving up, and I'll try it another time. All right. It's called pull method up down code. Move statement up down. Nope. Code. All right, I'll try it another day. I'm gonna look it up and I'm gonna try it another day because that's really cool. So now that we have our fetcher, which is, we know it's able to fetch data, that's great. We need to parse it. So let's get back to update. I believe that was update processor. So update processor, scroll through this, create fetch task. That creates the test. We fetch data, fetch task. So fetcher, yep, I believe we did that. Data, parse XML. Okay, so we need to create a processor that can parse this XML. And right now, this beautiful line of code for parsing the XML is only in this class and cannot be reused. So we'll create a processor.php clear. So in my original work, I had a bunch of this done, and I created object classes to represent a release and a release history like as a release collection. And I kind of went down that rabbit hole, and that's where I needed to back out and make it a bit simpler. Is like I said, I went down the rabbit holes. Final class, processor. So we don't want to make these dependent. It should just receive a release data. So we'll say, so private. Oh, whoa. This is one thing we gotta look at too. Is this? I don't know how I got to this. I typed something in wrong, and I ended up with that. So we're gonna do construct, and we want to receive the release XML as a string. And what we should do with that, let's move this to the right, is basically replicate this parse XML in the constructor. So we will say, let's create a, say, private data. We're going to parse the XML string, and we're going to turn it into a data array. And we're going to make this a little bit simpler than this code is doing too. So first we'll do XML equals, produces an e-warning error message for each error. Throws an exception if errors were detected, catch exceptions, and return a failure. We should wrap that and say try XML equals new simple XML element. We'll say release XML. What we should do is catch throwable. For those who don't know, throwable was added in PHP 7 and it is the base for everything, including fatal errors and exceptions. So this lets you catch a fatal error or an exception at the same time. But we're not going to return null in this case. We're going to do throw new invalid argument exception. The provided release XML could not be parsed. Yeah, we'll just keep it simple for that. So one thing that they're doing in here is they are reading the XML verbatim and having to cast everything to a string and get children. There's a nice little shortcut I like. So we'll say that release data equals, and we're not just putting it straight into data because there is some processing we have to do. This doesn't quite show it, but later on we need to determine like if the terms are security release, a few other items that we have to go through. But there's a nice little trick you can do with XML is you can decode, encode XML. You can take a simple XML element, encode it to JSON, and then decode it and get back the array. Hey Jeff, thanks for checking in. Awesome for you, even though you can't watch it, awesome for you to pop in. Thanks. So for right now, I want to debug this live. So I'm putting a stop null here. And if you caught my previous streams, I put stop null is like my cheater for creating a breakpoint. I put a breakpoint and then I use that to test. Oops, I want to put this back up. So let's create a test. And so in here, we're going to call it, processor test. And let's go through the motions again of the namespace. Again, Drupal and test go into the test namespace. So we have Drupal test, simply test projects, and we're in unit and release history. So we've got the processor class extends release history unit test base class. So let's test, we're going to just call it test constructor. No, why not? So again, let's rename this or document this. So test processing processing of release history data, and then data, not data provider. Covers default class of fetcher. Again, I like doing this because it does let me do command click, find the class. And, in here I could say covers. I didn't do this on the other one, but I could say, oh, wait, wrong thing, processor. So in here, I could do the two. I'm able to say what it covers, and then it links, that method then says, I'm verifying the data in this method. So let's just do, so client equals this, get mocked HTTP client, and let's copy that code. So we need a fetcher equals new fetcher client. And just so you know, eventually, both these classes will be defined as services once we get there. So we've got data equals that. We'll start with the current channel. Oh, one thing that is pretty cool is from usage. So in my class, in that method, how we verify what are the valid values, it actually will help you be, quote unquote, smarter about what is allowed. And this is due to the plugins. Where are my plugins? Installed the deep associated completion plugin. So this adds some really handy helpers on auto completing of array keys and various other items. So that's what's allowing me to type current, and it detects from usage what is there. So now we have the data. So we'll create our subject under test, which is a new processor. And we need to pass it the data. And we'll just say, if there's no exception, it passes. We're going to start small that way. So I have a debugger here because I just want to see what's in release data and make sure it's coming over okay. So again, we'll debug it. With unit tests, they're not run in a sub process because they don't manipulate the database. So we can run xdebug pretty easily. So here's the raw XML, and here's the array. So this is probably my favorite little trick. I can't remember where I picked it up, probably Stack Overflow or somewhere else. But you're able to convert the XML object to JSON and then decode it, and you get the data. There are some things lost though. Like if something's in a namespace, such as this DC namespace, that's where we get the creator. That does not come over, but we don't really need that. So it can be okay. So we have terms. So the project's modules, maintenance status, development status, and we have all of the releases and the terms for the releases. So let's look at what the core processor does here. And it looks like everything that they do in here, we just accomplished with encoding and decoding to JSON. So maybe that's something we should suggest core does too, because it looks like it's doing the exact same thing where release version terms. Oh, no, it combines it a bit. It has term, so it does flatten it so that way you have release type as a name. I like that. So let's copy that over as well. So we're going to have, now we're going to populate our objects data. So we're going to say this data. Actually, I don't even want to say this data. So we're going to say, so this is where it feels weird. Like processor is actually like an instance of release data. Unless we just returned, unless we made this a static class and just returned the data from the static class. Let's do that. I want to avoid making object values or value object classes instead. So we'll say public static function is get data. Yeah. It's called get data, and so we'll call processed data equals processor get data. We'll just do it that way. Because otherwise we could say like this name, but now we're into the realm where we have an object that's representing the release history, which is okay. But when I went down that road last time, I ended up going down a rabbit hole and making things complex. So I'm trying to just be simplistic and fast by just having an array blob, a blob of data in an array. So what we can do, I stopped the debugger, didn't I? So I want to get the debugger back. And we're going to work on the release data. Let's close this fetcher classes. We'll call this test get, nope, caps lock came on, get data. And we'll run the debugger again. Whoop. Failed because I renamed it. So we'll do debug. So we have the release data here. So all this is good. Terms. So what I want to do is we're going to do release. We're going to, I can't type release. No, data terms equals array map function. It gives us an array. Oh, wait. Yeah. Wait. Yep. It's an array. Term data. So we're going to map that. And that's going to be release data terms term. And we want this to actually, we're going to do terms and we'll have it be term data as item terms item name equals terms item value, because when you do an array map you can't manipulate keys, and we'll return terms. So let's rerun this, and I'm taking it out of an array map because there's no need for that kind of undefined index. Yeah. Sorry, try to be fancy when I did not need to be fancy at all. That's what I get for working in a lot of JavaScript lately. I'm used to everything being a map, reduce, and filter. So release data terms term as term data. We're going to create a new data array, and data equals release data. We'll reset data releases to an array and data terms to an array, just like they do here. Let's do debug. So we'll have data, term data, name equals term data value. And we'll copy this to basically do the same thing. We need to do the same thing throughout every release. So for each release data releases, and then release as release data. How did they? Okay, just going through. Maybe this is not doing the exact same, and you know what? Maybe I should just copy that. I am just going to copy this because I am reinventing the wheel and spent more time trying to be, trickier with it than needed to be. So since it is a copy and paste job, we need to make sure that we copy the reference, and we'll say C there. But in this case, we don't want to throw new invalid argument exception. Could not parse release XML. Yeah. We want to throw that, and then throw new could not determine project short name. So this will always return an array, the parsed, the processed release data, the release history XML, process gets data from a release history XML file. Okay, or we'll say string, not a file, because you need to pass in a string. Words do matter here. So what we can do is we'll say that this assert equals path auto should be in the data short name. This is one reason I dislike using arrays, because you don't know what you're getting back in, but I don't want to go through like I said, the rabbit hole of creating typed value objects for everything and then going through even more naming problems, because that's what happened last time. Oh, apparently I had a breakpoint there. So process data. So we have short name, we have type. Let's add some more tests just to make sure that, since we don't have a value object, we can describe it here. We can try to explain what it has in here. And this is a bit of tests or documentation. I mean, that's the main thing to remember is test equal documentation for developers. Oh, that's interesting. Terms just came back a whole bunch of empty arrays. Same with files. So that's interesting. So we know we're going to get that. And let's do self assert count. So there should always be 18. Since we're working on our own test fixture, we know that there should always be 18 returned. So let's do process data releases. And we'll take 8x. Oh, that's right, I can't. Release 8x18 equals process data releases 8.x 1.8. So now we'll just do some basic testing on that. This is when we could eventually move into like a generator to test more things, but I think this will be good enough. 8.x 1.8, we'll just get some testing in here. Name. Oh, there should be assert equals, not count. Release type, bug fixes. Oh, core compatibility is the main one. Is another one that we need. So self. Yeah, so I think instead of creating value objects for everything, like I was doing, we'll just create a bunch of like helper methods for now. And that just works with arrays, and then we'll create value objects as needed. So that way it's a little bit faster. So that's the. Has Path Auto ever had a security release? I really don't think so. Beta releases not covered by security releases. That's not in the terms. All right. Well, that's one step here. What we need to find out, I know somewhere in here it checks if something is insecure, and that's what I want this processor to do too. I want it to flag if a release is insecure so we can know about it. But it's not looking like. So if we look at update manager, security. So I'm going to do a find on here, security. Oh, here we go. Well, there's one. So project status. But, oh, it is? Oh. Thank you. Oh, that means I gotta go to 7.x. So let's look at terms. Release type secure. Ah, here we go. Okay. So if the release type is insecure, that is how we know. So I guess we don't need to. Let's see. Let me throw the debugger on, just so we can at least capture this as a note somewhere. So release here, terms, release type, bug fixes. But it's like, what if there's two? Well, I guess you can only have one type of release. I thought you could like say if it was bug fixes, features, and more. Like, I thought you could have multiple values as a release type. Self assert not equals insecure terms release type. Oh, yeah, duh. Because it's, never mind. Yeah, you can have multiple because right here it is an array of things. So assert array not contains. Sorry, assert not contains. So we're asserting that it's not an insecure release. That is our wonderful documentation on this piece of code. I said I'm trying to avoid going through and making release objects. So let's see, switch project status. Where's project coming from? For each project data, project status, project data, calculate. Oh boy. Available. Well, we know now it's called insecure. Nothing found. Oh, because it's in update.compare. Here we go. So calculates if something is insecure. And it just does in array. So it just does an in array check. So I guess we'll just, what's this do? Construction module version, object from a string version. Ooh. I'm kind of curious what this does. As I said, I want to try to use things that are in recommended version parser. I just want to see what that does real quick. Releases for each release children releases version K. So test equals, what was that class called? Module version. I want to see if this is something we can leverage and something that we can improve in core as well. Major version 1, actually, okay, so that doesn't really help provide much of anything for us. So we'll close that. And I'm closing all my tabs to kind of give a refresh to myself and get back where I was. So we have this test. Okay, perfect. So we now have something that fetches I just realized that the processor kind of does the test, also the fetching of it. But we now have those things set up. So the next step is to figure out how we want to integrate this better. So the reason why we're doing this is we need to decide what versions of core things are compatible with. So we have this core version manager, which fetches all the versions of core and saves them to a table. And what we need to be able to do is know what versions of core a module is compatible with. So what if we created a compatibility checker? I'm trying to think about how far we can get before we like tie everything together. So let's create a new compatibility checker. Before we do, let's core compatibility. Projects Drupal available. Oh, so maybe we can do this. All right. Get possible core update versions, set release message. Oh, we don't want that. Is core compatible? So this is what we really need. Is we need this semver satisfies, because that will tell us if it works or not. But it looks like this class doesn't give us anything extra than using semver directly. And again, this is one where I feel like so now I'm making a compatibility checker to run method that could be done in the processor, like if we return a release value. So I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to go for it. We're going to call it project release.php, and we're going to make a value object. But we can make it a dumb value object. And when I say that, like, we don't need to get super into the architecture of it, but as we're going, like, it's not making sense to do a lot of this extra work. So we'll do release history. So final class project release struct array of data. And we're gonna get real simplistic and say there's the private data blob, and then this data equals data. And we'll say we'll create public function is compatible is core compatible with the core version, and we'll delete that file. And we're just going to return false all the time here until we. That's a typo and a half. Typo, rename to compatible. We're going to also add one that says function is insecure, which we know we can do. We can verify by test. So we'll say return in array insecure this data terms release type. And we'll strict check it. So what we'll be able to do is this would be then semver satisfies. Now we can trust using the composer semver package because it is a dependency of Drupal core. Like if we go to the composer.json for core, it is in the dependencies for core. So we can trust on it. Technically, we should depend on it too, so that way if core ever changed, but I highly doubt that will happen. So with the semver satisfies, we're able to say version is core version, and the constraints are this data core compatibility. And core compatibility works if it's 7.x as well, so we'll have to add those tests for this. So now the processor, in my opinion, where'd it go? So releases, so data releases version equals this value should be actually, we're going to move that and call it release data equals there. And we're going to have this be new project release data, and just update any of this any calls to data version releases So now if we run the processor test, everything's going to be broken. Because we completely changed the structure, cannot use object of type as array. So we will say, so right here, this should be actually, so we'll say assert inject release. Oh, actually, no. We want to say assert release instance of project release. And we'll be cheaters. Return and return a getter. And for kicks, we'll add a setter. I really don't like this pattern, but actually, no, I'm not going to go into this pattern. So we're going to say, we're going to do public function get name. Actually, yeah, we will. Instead of having to come up with all the different ones, we don't want to make a matching setter though. So we'll do the matching getter. Name. And we'll say self assert false is insecure. We'll hit play. And that should fix that. Great. Now what we'll do is we'll make another test that says self assert true release is core compatible with 8.0. Fix that. 8.9.1. Kind of bleeding over in the tests here about different things, but you can clean it all up later. So technically this should not be available for 8.7.7. So if we hit play. Okay, so now we're able to fetch release data, get all releases. We know if it's insecure and if it's compatible with a version of core. Great. Just to make that complain less, I'm going to define property string name and core compatibility. Now make those be happy. Okay, so now we need to figure out the next step. So there's various approaches we could take to this. We could always load up all of the versions of Drupal core, or we could generate a giant matrix that says, given a project and its versions, create an entry for all of the Drupal core versions it's available with. One could be faster. It depends on where we want to put the work. So we currently have, let me start ddev. And then I'll open the database up to try to explain it a little bit better. So the good news is that we now have a way of downloading the data, turning it into a project release, and knowing if it's compatible with core or not. Now we just need to decide how we want to store that. And so far, this is a lot more elegant than I had set up previously. So we at least have some wins here. So, okay, I updated my database connection. So we have the simply test core versions table. This saves the version number, the minor, the major, the patch, all of that goodness. We need to create something that saves all the project versions. There's currently a versions table. This is actually, this is left over from what I was working on. So this is one idea I had where we create a table that is basically the release and the core compatibility. And when we load, what we would do is we would load these versions. These are what are returned to the end user. And we got the core compatibility. And then we just load all the versions of core. And we have to check all of them against the core compatibility record. Now, the good part is we know this core compatibility. If it's 7.x, we can look for core major versions of 7. If it's 8.x, we can just look for core major versions of 8.x. If it's a constraint, we have to load 8 and 9. And my fear is that we'd be loading like 100 records at once and doing a bunch of logic checks. So the alternative would be to create just a bunch of rows. We'd like the node grants table, how the node grants table can be really big because it's essentially a matrix of options, is we would have to do that. So there would be a database entry. There would be for 7.x 1.0, there would be, however many versions of Drupal 7 there are, there'd be an entry for each version of Drupal 7. So that way we know what versions it's capable with. But I guess that's probably the more in-depth option. So maybe we should just go with this part where we store the core compatibility and then load it and filter it out and then make improvements later. So we'll do that. Well, I don't know if that made sense to anybody else because I was kind of thinking out loud to myself, but we'll create a table that stores all these project versions. And that's where this data we worked on gets dumped into. And whenever we need to find core versions, we pass in that project's compatibility. So what we should do here, I think one thing we need to add to the core version manager is not just get major versions, but we would have to do public function get with compatibility. So we're popping back to the core bit a little bit. Do we refactor major minor? So Adam, what do you mean by refactor major minor? Like in the core versions, or because the problem is that we don't know any of that. I mean, we know it for Drupal core, but for the module, we have no idea what it supports. Well, there's nothing to refactor because we don't pay attention to a module's major and minor. Like we don't care about a module's major and minor. We care about the major and minor for its Drupal core, which we don't know except for the constraint. So what we'll need to do, oh man, it's just there's no really good way to work around this. Which is what we'll really need is constraint, and we're gonna have to just load the entire table. Yeah. So what we would have to do is we're just basically going to have to load the entire table. And do versions equal array a filter versions. I don't remember what this even returns. Core version test. That's right. It's an object. So this is not perfect, but we will do class row, and we do return sumver satisfies, and we'll use the constraint. So the row version in the database, the core versions is just version. Maybe this was actually the way I should have started, is by making it so we could fetch core results by a constraint. So I'm taking a bit of a detour from, we're able to parse release history and know what, and be able to receive the core compatibility. Actually, we're not. I forgot to handle 7.x. So I'm bouncing around a little bit right now because I'm kind of at a crossroads, the same place I was at last time. I got to the same place, and now I'm starting to hit some of the same conundrums. So let's just first test loading versions by this. So copy some of that. Public function test. What did I name that function? Test get with compatibility. This test is kind of a dirty one because it will oh shoot, we gotta update for the major versions. So we'll do 7, 8, and 9. I say it's dirty because we are live updating the database based off current release versions, so it has a chance to break if there is a Drupal core release. So if we did get with compatibility of 7.x, like let's say that the compatibility constraint 7.x, that's one thing we're not testing for. And the processor test or the release history test is that if core compatibility is missing, it defaults to the API version of the project. So maybe I should add that quick. Function test API test core compatibility. So if we did data should be 7.x channel. What's the last release here? It should be 7.13. So release 7.113 equals data releases. Oh, we need to process the data. So we do assert release instance of project release. So self, we'll just copy these. And that should be false because it's not compatible. But it is compatible with, I don't know, valid core version, but it doesn't matter. So it should be compatible with 7.56. So if we run this, we should get an error that core compatibility is not defined on the release. Undefined index. Okay. So what we need to do is in the processor, we need to check let's see. Let's debug this real quick. As I said earlier, the current, the release history for the current channel adds core compatibility to every release. The legacy 7.x, 8.x, 6.x, etc. adds a API version at the root level, which is right here. So API version. So we'll say is legacy equals false. I don't like that, but so is legacy equals is set data API version. And what we need to do in here, it's like if is legacy release data k core compatibility equals data API version. I believe that should fix it. We'll rerun it. Legal string offset. Oh, shoot. There we go. Didn't need the K there. So process data release data. We now have the core compatibility. So it passed on the 7.x from the project data into core compatibility, and the test passed. So that fixes that up a little bit. So now, regardless if it's a 7.x module or current module release channel, we get the core compatibility. And as you saw, 7.x is a valid constraint, like upper 8.8, or like it parses correctly. So now we want to assert the count. This should be, I have no idea how many this is. Or major, what? We'll just say it's 50. So if we run the test, it should be something that's a reasonable number. It's going to take a little bit because it is downloading the core data. Maybe we can get this should get some kind of mocked data in to not download the entire release API for Drupal.org when we need to run the tests. So 89, let's see. Select count from simply test core versions. Let's see, major equals 7. 89 rows. Okay, so that looks correct. So we know that given a constraint of 7.x, we receive 89 results. This is one where I do not want to put it into a, why is this erroring? Oh. Where I would not want to put this into a, what do you want to call it? A data provider, because it would run the test 5 times, and that means we're downloading all the core releases 5 times. So this is where I would want to just make a test that runs various things. So if we did 9.1, now we'll do 10, because there are no releases for 10. We'll say 9, and we'll say 8.9.1. We'll rerun it just to make sure we have the test coverage. So this is 0. And one thing I want to do too eventually is get JavaScript testing into the Simply Test project, but we still just have to get this area nailed down. 32. I believe from last time that does make sense that there are 32 Drupal 9 releases. One thing we should check is just 8.x. 14 8.9 releases. That sounds great. You know, I don't know if it's perfect, but it seems reasonable. And the main point here is to show that different constraints are getting us different results, which means that it is filtering out. Cannot parse constraint. Oh. $200. Okay, so we have that. You know, really, I feel like we should have a separate issue that just adds this method, the core version manager under there, but there's so much work to be done that I'm really chunking up work. I'm just trying to get it done. Get releases based on compatibility. The version constraint. The releases. So what we'll do now is we want to store the the main thing I'm avoiding right now is figuring out how we're going to store this data. So I'm trying to find ways that will read the data. So I'm just trying to push back on that a little bit. So we have a way of getting with compatibility. Now let's look at where we actually fetch core versions from. So right here, we get core versions from this URL, which the front end tells us what it wants for the core versions. But the problem is it shouldn't be doing it that way. What it should be doing, so if I look at core, so here, see, we're trying to assume the core version manager, and then we find all the versions. What really should be happening is the project version should be passed in, and then we find the compatible versions based off of that. So instead of just, we're going to create public function compatible core versions, string project name, string project version. So what we would do is to do load project version, load version from database based on project name and version. And then we would do this core version manager, get with compatibility and project release. So we would have then, you know, we would get compatibility from release record in the database. And then we would have release core compatibility. And we could return this with CID of so we would want the cache ID. So we would want it to be cached by page cache, so this would be faster. That's how we can mitigate around having to do PHP computations. So we could add cache tags, which would be implode CID. Oh, separator is that. We'll do a colon for the separator. Hold on. I'll move that to here. The reason why I'm using implode is that way it's a little bit easier to make a dynamic string. So we would want it to be, we'll call it core versions, or no, shoot. Actually, yeah. Because the one reason I say shoot is when we update, Benji brought this up before. So inside of update data, when we update release data, we invalidate tags against that core version, which is a good, actually that's a good thing here. So what we want, and because we're not going to update core versions often, it's only going to be whenever there's a release of Drupal core. So we can set up a service that monitors that and says like, yep, time to go update our data. So we want to, because when you invalidate tags, cache invalidate tags. So when you invalidate tags, when you invalidate cache tags, I believe expression, I thought you could, I thought with tags you could do like partials, like if it had like core version something else, everything after that would get invalidated, but maybe that's just when you delete tags. So we'll just add multiple tags to it. So we want to keep this core major version. Oh, geez, I cannot. Apparently just finishing this part is the hardest. Trying to take notes here is the hardest part for me right now. So we want to keep that cache tag based off the major version. Oh, no. Shoot. We want to find a way to properly invalidate that cache tag. And maybe it is just we have core versions as a cache tag. So we have a specific one, and then we have a generic one. Core version manager. I want to update this here. Actually, no. So what we'll do, sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way forward. What we'll do here is whenever we update data, we'll only invalidate the cache tags for that one major version. So if we update releases for Drupal 9, it doesn't invalidate the cache for Drupal 7 releases. However, it will always invalidate this compatible core versions because it's impossible to know what major version we're using. Although I guess we could. I'm going to make it to do loop over results to find core version tags to attach here. So if we know we only have Drupal 7, then we could just say core versions major 7. So that way we can leverage page cache more for some of these more computational expensive requests. So, but for this, we want to have a core compatibility core compatibility, or we'll call it project, yeah, core compatibility for the project name and the project version, because we need to, yeah, there we go. We want to have we want this to be cached based on the project name and project version. And then we can make it more granular based off of the core versions found. So I think this makes sense. I'm hoping it will be the way that works. I'm going to route for it. And we'll call it core, what did I name it? Compatible core versions. I'm just kidding. Core compatible. And then we'll say I made it. We'll just change this to project and version. Is when you do routing in Drupal, it matches what's inside these brackets to the parameter name using reflections. So we want to have it where, given I have, to do notes for test. I need to wrap up shortly, but I want to make sure I leave some notes. I'm going to work on this later. So I'm making some notes for myself. Okay, so notes for test. So this would be simply, because this is going to require a complete rebuild of the front end. Well, not rebuild, but a big change. Compatible, because before we were trying to determine the core compatibility in JavaScript, and now it's moved completely to the back end. So it'd be like simply test core compatible path auto 7.x 1.8 is something that we would get. Okay. So that would then return the list of core versions we can display. Before we do go, like I said that I had started working on this, and I like the table structure I had here for project versions of short name, version, tag, date, status, and core compatibility. So I'm going to go to that branch and copy that in. And maybe I can show you some of the stuff that I was working on too. So the install. So I kind of, like I said, I went down the rabbit hole. So we had the project release object, which is kind of like what I just built. It got the version, it got the tag, published core compatibility to array. But the big difference is I created this project release collection, which you would pass in the raw elements. This is like what our processor does now. And it creates an array of project releases, and you can pass get compatible releases with the core version, which does assembler verify. I guess we could have just kept building off of this, but I needed a fresh start to clear my head. So we need the project version manager, and I think that's where things fell apart. As I was creating this project version manager, and just sometimes you get too far into the weeds, and you need to just step back and rebuild from what you've learned to be able to be effective. That's the word I want to look for. So final class is project version manager, and I named the constant table name. The table name was simply test project versions. So let's go to install. I'm going to copy the schema. So the schema is that we have the short name, the version, the tag, date, status, and core compatibility, which we really just need core compatibility, the version, and short name. That's what we're going to be looking up in our controller. So one thing I want to do is we're going to create our simply test projects.project version manager service, which is class project version manager. Okay, so we've got that, and in our controller here, we're going to add that in like we did the private project version manager. Let's add it in project version manager. I know I said I was going to end it soon, but I feel like it's all, no, don't unremove. Update PHP doc comment. I feel like it's all coming together real quick, so I want to see how far I can push this real fast. At least the scaffolding of it. What? How did, oh. So this project project version manager equals project version manager. Okay, so that's documented. And it's now added. So we would do the release equals this get release, and we would pass the project and version. Then if release is equal to null, return new JSON response. It would say like not found. We'll find a better way to word that. So release, so actually it would say like if release is not, no, we'll just say release is not equal to null, and we'll say release core compatibility. All right, so we can do core compatibility. And then we still want this. Let's copy in these here. Actually, we would want cache tags equals core versions CID there. We'll just make that a to-do right there to loop over. Although get with compatibility returns an array of them. So I think we could do a reduce. Well, I'll do that later. We'll do that later. We can. So get release, we want to add this method, which means we need to add the database connection. So I'm going to copy in that from here. And actually, I'll copy in the client too, because I have a feeling our fetcher is going to end up in here also. Or actually, that's how we would get our fetcher. So this release. So what we would want to do is, what else can I copy? I like to copy things because it just makes life a lot easier. So self table name, fields, and the table name, condition. Fetch it associate. So we don't need any order bys, but the fields would be condition, where the field name is short name is project, and condition version is version. All right. So yeah, so we'd be able to get the release, and this would return an array or null, which we would fetch, and that would return. So we would do get release, which returns the release blob, and then we fetch the compatible releases and return that. I'm running out of time, so I can't test this, but I think we're here. I think we're here. The next steps are to do fetch and save project release data, compatible core versions, project versions. We need to change this to be project version manager, get versions, get releases. And we'll have this be a new, let's see, we'll say it. Cacheable response is the list of versions, and we'll come up with cache tags for that. Like just project versions of project. So we'll do that. Add this method, which is the same as this, but without the version on it. And then we just need a method for saving all the release data. All right, I have to run because I have some errands to do, and I try to keep these to be around 2 hours on Sunday. I think this is all set. I'll probably work on this throughout the week, and I'm hoping that we can land this, because now I feel like this should work. The only thing that's missing right now is saving the data, which we have. Oh, I just keep stretching this out. We have some data. So let's see here. ddev.simplytest. Because I just can't stop myself. Let's do a ddev drush cr. Projects. So it's project versions. And locally, I have, what did I get saved in here when I was testing? Path auto. All right. So let's see what comes back if I type in path auto. Oh, too few arguments. Fair enough. Let PHP Storm generate those arguments for me. Rebuild caches. All right. List is false. Oh, because I don't know how to spell path auto. Path auto. All right. This is working. It didn't work because I did fetch. Let's do fetch all associated. Oh, this all soc. What's it want? It wants the key by version. Fetch all and secure by version. Here we go. Great. So we're getting back the list. Actually, it's I don't. Let's just fetch all. Because when it's what? Come on. Oh, mode. So the cache isn't working here because I've turned off all caching locally. Great. So I did fetch all because in JavaScript, it's easier to work with an array than an associative array, which is just an object in JavaScript. So here we go. Path auto versions. We've got every single version. That's great. Now let's try the main test, which is core compatibility. Well, let's just verify this one too. Let's just so you know too, if you ever highlight your in Chrome, which is the same as Brave and everything else, if you do Command Enter, it always opens your URL in a new tab. So major version, let's do 9. Great. So this is still working. Now let's do the newest one we added for compatible versions. Oh, I hope this works. If it does, we're here. Adam, I did it. We're good to go. I just need to write tests and update the JavaScript front end, which is probably going to be just as hard as this. Maybe not. There's less research. But path auto, let's pick a version of 7.x-1. Core version requires that you provide a value for major version argument. Either that. Core versions. Oh, I know what I did wrong. I know. I'm so glad we're almost there too. I gotta change this to compatible core versions. Clear the cache. Oh. Moment of truth. Hey, so minor. So man, I feel like when we save the data, we need to pad left the minor versions because 7.78 is greater than here, but it's not returning as so. But all right. Oh, I don't like this part. So see here how it's returning 232. That's because we are doing an array filter. And when you do array filter, it preserves the keys. So we want to do array values at the end of that to rekey the array, which means we can work with it in JavaScript properly. So if I refresh, we've got everything here. And if I were to check on version, let's go to the bottom. If I were to take 8.x 1.8 and pass that here, oh, we have it. We have no versions before 8.8. I'm going to commit this. It's not ready to be merged yet, but we have it. We were able to get compatibility sorted out. Wait, why does it say there's an error? What's wrong with the file? Oh, it's a cache thing. So I'm just going to quick review diffs and make sure that I document anything that's like dangling, but we've got it. I'm glad I did a restart. It's kind of the same that I did before, but I simplified it in a few areas, or at least I took a simpler approach, and I had the joy of doing it on a live stream and hopefully taught a few things, or, I think it helped me because it made me think a little bit slower and not get down the rabbit hole as much. So yeah, loop results to find a more appropriate core version, load the database. Well, that's done. We were able to get that added in. So yeah, so now it's just about making it cacheable. This release history, honestly, I think the fetcher and processor will end up in the version manager, but we'll see how that goes. Core version manager, I would love it if we just had to do this as a database query, but we would end up creating like a million rows, which isn't that bad, but it's over engineering and over optimization up front. With proper cache tags on the routes should be a problem. If we have performance problems down the road, we know this is where we can fix them. The project version manager, we'll just add all the tests. I want to expand the release history testing to, like I said, decoupled router has a 8.x release that's no longer supported, and now they have their semantic versioning release. We made a dependency on the update module just for the fetcher for the constant, I believe. Yeah. So that's there. Install. Oh, that's one thing I want to add right away is, I want to copy this. So just, I know, like I said, I used the keyboard. I did Command D. Command D duplicates the line of code. Just gonna update documents here. So yep, so this will ensure that the schema is installed. So we'll add that. Routing. We need to add the test. We verified it manually though. In services, we've got that. Let's put this on the same line. Commit message. Add project version table and routes for compatible releases. So I'm going to commit and push that. Recompile. Why did it what? Oh, I'll just push because I know I got to rebuild that. So as I said, the JavaScript app is going to be a kicker here. Maybe. Oh. Fetch all experimental. Oh, that's because I had that one bug. Because right now it is set up that when you type in a module, everything just breaks. But we try to determine the core version from project selection, on project change, set project. That's when I don't even remember. I have to re-upload this in my brain. Oh yeah, so the core version. It's like on selected project, set Drupal core version. We just fetch all the versions of Drupal core, and we got to rebuild a lot of the front end. But the good news is that it works. There's one thing that we need to work on, and I'm gonna need to make a note of this for me locally, is we need a to-do method to get releases compatible with a version of core, reverse of get release. I want to put this up here. So the new version of Simply Test is going to allow you to add additional projects. So if you pick, let's say you pick, password policy, and you want to add the token module because password policy has a conditional support for token. Well, we need to make sure that when you add token, you can only select versions of token that are compatible with the version of Drupal core you selected. So that's another to do at this point. That should be very easy because it's the reverse of this, and it's the same thing we did in the core compatibility method. So I'm excited. This just got unblocked and has been a problem that I've been trying to tackle for the past 2 weeks. I spent some nights a week or so ago and just kept going in circles, and now it's nice to see this pull through. So thanks again for tuning in. I hope you learned something, and thanks for support. Again, if you want to support development with funded time, because right now I'm basically just developing this during the live streams, and I try to fit in some spare time, but funding does basically ensure that we can pay for development. It's not that like I need money, but I have clients that pay me time, and I'm not going to stop. It allocates, right? It buys my time to have focus, and it buys time for other folks to have focus to work on this. So your sponsorship does go a long way. We are very close to getting the new version launched up, which will have a lot of nice features and make it easier to maintain. So thanks for tuning in. And the next stream will technically be, the first Sunday of April is the 4th, which is Easter Sunday here. So I don't think there will be a stream because probably a lot of people will be doing their family stuff, and I will be doing family stuff as well. So the 4th, maybe I'll do it on the 11th. Maybe I'll make this weekly. Just stay tuned, and I'll post it on Twitter, or my website. So thanks, and thanks for tuning in. Bye.